We're now joined by human rights activist Ms. Sarah Wilkinson, joining us from Midlands, UK. Ms. Wilkinson, welcome to the program. Let's start off with the humanitarian catastrophe, famine, malnutrition, hunger, which is affecting every inch of Gaza as we speak. How severe is the situation right now?
Yeah, well, you're right. It is affecting every single area across Gaza. But a lot of people have stopped talking about the north of Gaza, Jabalia, Beit Hanun, these areas, ever since the Netzarim corridor was built and Israeli military barracks were set up in that area. Very little discussion about what is happening in the north has been made on air. Now, what we know is that there has always been more than 500,000 people in the north of Gaza. The mainstream media has been downplaying that and saying, no, there's only 300 or 200,000. We now think that there's about 800,000 people that are still residing in the north. There's no fruit, there's no vegetables, there's no chicken, there's no protein. Very, very little food has been coming in. The official figures of Palestinian children under the age of 5 who've already died from this Israeli-engineered famine is about 32. But you have to remember that there's nobody counting the deaths any longer. There's nobody there who's able to collate the amount of people that are dying of malnutrition. So the numbers are far, far higher. We have been trying through various campaigns with my colleague Shameen Suleiman. We've been using various campaigns to get shelters into the north of Gaza and clean water through a British Palestinian doctor, Dr. Mohammed. But in all honesty, the children are so malnourished that disease and famine, which we've been talking about since November. We were talking about it while we were in Jordan trying to organize the airdrops. We said that this famine will take hold, and that's exactly what it has. And so we're seeing the return of biblical diseases, if you like, return. We're seeing things like cholera, bubonic plague is on the list, but hasn't yet been actually declared or announced. But all the other diseases, Shigella disease, hepatitis A is a massive problem. And when people haven't got clean water and they haven't got food and they haven't got any sort of nourishment whatsoever to build up their immune systems, they're dying of hepatitis A. This is a treatable disease. In 2024, children and adults are dying of hepatitis A. So it's actually it's a real hotspot of famine, and very little is being mentioned about it. It's almost being ignored because we've had campaigns like All Eyes on Rafah. People have been looking at Deir al-Balah. People have been looking at al-Mawazi, and rightly so this morning. But in the north, it's an ongoing, worsening condition that children are simply fading away from an Israeli-engineered famine. There's no food getting in at all. Some people have talked about not eating any sort of meat or fruit or vegetables for months. There is a little bit of flour, but this is being sold at extortionate prices because on the black market, a lot of Palestinians cannot afford even bags of flour. So the famine in the north is an extremely important issue. It needs to be talked about more. I am aware of the other massacres going on, and the Israelis deliberately do this. They create sort of several massacres throughout the whole region of Gaza so that it's very difficult to concentrate on one area. But without Dr. Mohammed, we probably wouldn't have got any clean water, drinkable water into the north. It's absolutely incredible that he managed through public donations to get clean drinkable water into Jabalia. However, this is not enough. You're talking of 750,000 minimum Palestinian people, and that's a lot of people to feed when there is no food, and there is no meat, there's nothing. There's very little clean water. They've resorted to drinking contaminated water. So with hepatitis A, you can see where this is going.
Ms. Wilkinson, the Israelis, they claim that aid is getting into Gaza. Of course, that's a false claim. The evidence on the ground is showing that aid is not getting into Gaza. Are the Israelis using hunger as a weapon of war against the civilians, the besieged Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. If that's the case, this is a war crime of the highest proportions. This manner of action is one of the main constructs of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah, well, I've said a couple of times, what the Israelis are doing is an absolute Rubik's Cube of genocide. Genocide on every possible level and formation. And one of them is, yes, using starvation as a weapon of war. And if you want to call it a war, it's a weapon of its genocide. And we were talking about this months ago. Western leaders and politicians have had ample warning. We have been saying for months that starvation is being used as a weapon of war. And yes, you're right, it's a great crime against humanity, but so is genocide. And this genocide has many facets, because when you starve people, you create disease, you create famine. Everything goes hand in hand. So if you have no nutrition, you have no way of drinking clean water, you have no access to food, you have no way to build up your immune system, then that is another form of genocide. So yes, it's another war crime that the Israelis will continue to deny. But I think, as my colleague Tim Anderson, I just saw him live on your show, as he said, the Israelis are saying, well, the truth will prevail. Well, we're seeing the truth real time on our phones, literally every single day. We are seeing the causes of famine. We're seeing disease. We're seeing children die of malnutrition in 2024, real time on our phones. So the evidence is all there. The fact that the ICJ, the fact that the UN are very slow, it's political cowardice, by the way, that they don't act to put a stop to this. But the fact that, we are still talking about what they're now saying, the return of starvation or the onset of famine is very, very short-sighted. We have been talking about this since November, and so it's been very clear right from the start. This was where we were going to end up. And in fact, the Palestinians have lasted an awful lot longer than I thought they would, thanks to the public donations and the campaigns that have been run. However, we are going to be in a situation where the famine is going to fast track, it's going to increase. Hepatitis A is killing people. Shigella disease is killing people. There was an outbreak of measles, which we haven't heard a lot about recently. But like I say, bubonic plague, cholera, all of these old biblical diseases, and E. coli from it contaminated water, and the fact that bodies are not being buried, and they're not being buried deep enough, there's nowhere to bury bodies. This is going to create another form of disease on top of everything else. So yes, it's a weapon of war, a weapon of genocide, and the Israelis are clearly committing in it. And we don't need the United Nations or an independent investigations for us to know that the Israelis are trying to annihilate and exterminate an entire population, and they're doing it in the cruelest of ways, because this attacks the children and the babies first. So, yeah, absolutely, this is a weapon of war.
All right, thanks a lot, human rights activist Sarah Wilkinson, joining us from Midlands, UK.